the target, they were ready to take on big bad restaurant companies and big bad employers and blah, 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 blah. I don't think they ever envisioned that they'd actually be on the other side of the table from employees and tip wage employees defending their jobs. Like, I don't think Saru and her team ever conceived of a world where they'd be taking on restaurant employees. They wanted to take on the bad guys in the boardroom. I don't know how much when McDonald's made the decision to go down this road, they appreciated that factor as well. Like, you're now going into a space that is protected by employees that like the tip wage world as it currently is, that don't want changes to the tip credit world as it currently is, right? I suspect you've got 1,000 times more tipped workers protective of their jobs and industry model than you do quick service frontline workers.
Why is McDonald's taking on the tip credit? Hello, I'm Jonathan Mays, editor-in-chief of Restaurant Business, and welcome to a special episode of A Deeper Dive, which is all about one of the most complex issues in the restaurant industry, the tip credit. The tip credit enables restaurants and other companies with tipped employees to pay less than a minimum wage so long as they get enough in tips to cover the difference. That issue has been fought in city halls and in state legislatures for years, but for the most part, it pitted restaurant industry interests and even some servers themselves against labor groups and others. It typically does not affect fast food chains like McDonald's, which don't accept tips. Yet in a recent episode on the CNBC program Squawk Box, McDonald's CEO Chris Kempczinski, in response to a question on no taxes on tips, came out against the tip credit, saying that the combination of the two issues gave full-service restaurants an advantage. Not only did Kempczinski say this, but McDonald's took the additional step of leaving the National Restaurant Association over the topic, leaving the industry's top trade association without the world's largest restaurant chain. So over the next 30 or so minutes, we are going to talk with three different experts, starting with one of McDonald's biggest foes, who is now on the same side with the company on this topic, Saru Jayaraman, the president and co-founder of the labor advocacy group One Fair Wage. All right, why don't you start out by just saying your name and your title?
My name is Saru Jayaraman. I'm the co-founder and president of One Fair Wage.
Were you surprised that McDonald's did this?
Not entirely, no, because we've heard this from McDonald's over the last decade, actually. So I think it's important to back up and understand what the issue is that the CEO of McDonald's was talking about. So the restaurant industry is the largest and fastest growing private sector employer in the United States, largest employer of women, people of color, immigrants, 13.6 million workers nationally. But it's the absolute lowest paying and has been for generations, largely due to a subminimum wage for tipped workers that's a direct legacy of slavery. So prior to emancipation, waiters in the U.S., mostly in the Northeast, where restaurants were prior to emancipation, were white men. They got actual wages, no tips. Tipping was not prevalent at the time. In 1853, they went on strike for higher wages, and the restaurant industry started looking for cheaper labor. So after emancipation, 10 years later, 1865, the restaurant industry started hiring newly freed Black women in particular coming up from the South and telling them, you're not going to get any wage from us. You're going to get this new thing that's come from Europe called a tip. Now in Europe, for generations, dating back to feudal times, tipping was an extra or bonus on top of a wage or salary that a servant got, meaning serfs and servants in feudal Europe got a full wage, what we call one fair wage, a full wage with tips on top. It was post-emancipation and because of the legacy of slavery that restaurants said, no, we're going to use tips as a replacement for wages rather than as a complement or supplement as they had always intended to be. And so in 1865, you started to see a $0 wage for tipped restaurant workers. They only got tips, and that was made law in 1938 as part of the New Deal, when everybody got the right to a federal minimum wage except for tipped workers. And that was due to a new trade lobby that had come together at the time called the National Restaurant Association, founded in 1919 with the express intent and purpose of ensuring that restaurant workers never got a full minimum wage. That was their original reason to come together, was to ensure that restaurant workers never got a full minimum wage. Well, we went from $0 in 1938 all the way up to $2.13 an hour, the current federal minimum wage for tipped workers. And 43 states still allow a subminimum wage. But over the last 100 years, since that law passed, we've seen the industry become more complex. Now, the National Restaurant Association represents, yes, full service restaurants that have waiters and tipped workers and can pay a subminimum wage. But a good half of the association is what we call limited service restaurants, everything from McDonald's to Cosi and Panera, restaurants that don't have a waiter, don't have full service, aren't really tipped employees, and so aren't allowed to pay their workers a sub-minimum wage for tipped workers. And in the midst of all of this, there are 7 states that, by the way, got rid of this system many decades ago. California, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, Minnesota, Montana, and Alaska require a full minimum wage with tips on top, have for decades. And all of the chains, from IHOP and Denny's, who do have tipped workers, to McDonald's and Wendy's that don't, they all grow faster in California than any other state in the United States of America. California requires all of those workers to be paid a full minimum wage with tips on top. So we have been advocating for 20 years that all other states follow the lead of California, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, Minnesota, Montana, and Alaska and require everybody to be paid the same wage. Let tips be on top of the wage as they were from feudal times. Don't treat companies differently. Make everybody pay a minimum wage. After all, most Americans understand the minimum wage to mean you don't get to pay less. An employer does not get to pay less. So for years of this advocacy, we had heard from legislators, oh, I've heard this before. McDonald's has been telling us this in lobbying meetings. They've been saying it's not fair that they have to pay the minimum wage and IHOP and Denny's get to pay a sub-minimum wage. So we actually said to McDonald's, please go public with this. Say this. It's not fair to you. It's also not fair to small business coffee shops. It's not fair to Subway or Chipotle. It's not fair to, frankly, half of the industry or more that doesn't have tipped workers. And so it really was the no tax on tips policy that finally kind of drew it out of the CEO of McDonald's saying, this is not fair. And it isn't. It's not fair to McDonald's, but it's also not fair to the tiny little cafe in Chicago or Iowa that has to pay a full minimum wage. Those places sometimes get tips. You know, people might put a tip in a tip jar in Starbucks or in a coffee shop in Indiana. But those employers still, for the most part, pay a full minimum wage, and those tips are on top of the wage as they should be.
Right. Well, Starbucks has instituted tipping, and so does many of the companies.
Don't pay a sub-minimum. So again, it is possible to have tipping and not pay a sub-minimum wage.
Saru may not have been surprised by this, but many in the restaurant industry were. That included a number of full-service restaurant operators. Full-service restaurants hardly believe they have an advantage over limited service restaurants because of the tip credit. According to the National Restaurant Association, full-service restaurants' median pre-tax income was just 2.8% of revenues, lower by about a percentage point since before the pandemic. It is 4% at limited service restaurants. While Jayaraman argues that full-service restaurants pay less per worker on labor, their total labor costs are far higher because it takes a lot of workers to run one of those locations. On average, 36.5% of full-service restaurants' revenues go to labor, compared with 31.7% for limited service restaurants. And chains like McDonald's, that number is even lower. So full-service restaurants are both less profitable and they spend more on labor. And that's not even considering the fact that consumers have been reducing their visits to full-service restaurants for years. We spoke with Martin Murch, who operates the Burger Bar restaurant in Chicago, along with a couple of ghost kitchens and catering operations, to talk about it. Do you feel that the tip credit gives you an unfair advantage, as McDonald's would say?
No, absolutely not. The tip credit actually is extremely advantageous to any of the operators, regardless of where they reside in the United States. If you think about the basic structure of a full service operator, 60% of your labor line item is guest engagement team members, and the tip credit really helps really helps the operators to be able to perform and make the model work. But it also, as important, if not more important, it allows the team to be able to generate earnings that they would not be able to get otherwise. I mean, if somebody's working for minimum wage, they're limited. There's a table, there's a glass ceiling, or there's a ceiling that you can't get beyond. In the hospitality sector, it allows people to earn more income by performing better, right, to the guest engagement, right? Tips is to ensure prompt service. The better service that a team member gives, the more that they can generate revenue and income for themselves.
Mhm. So why not say pay them a higher rate, for instance, just raise menu prices, how much ever, pay them a higher rate, and then, rely on a smaller amount of tip? Why doesn't that work?
Well, it still limits the team member and their earning income. Here in Chicago, what I can speak to is that our team, and we're not in the downtown central business district. We're not in the kind of entertainment arena. Our team, on average is anywhere from $28 an hour in tip generation to $55 an hour in tip generation. And that is far above any minimum wage throughout the entire country. And they're already earning above minimum wage. And the laws that we abide by here is if a team member doesn't meet the minimum wage with their tip income, the operators have to bridge the gap anyways. So to attack this is really, it's really a tax revenue basis of the different administrations that are out there, right? They want to be able to generate a higher um, uh, payroll tax, and they know to do that the operators are going to have to increase their menu pricing, and they're going to be able to generate a higher sales tax. And it's all really predicated because the administrations aren't balancing their budget and managing their, fiduciary responsibilities correctly. I don't want to limit a team member on what their earning potential is, right? If they are spectacular and engaging the memories and the relationship with the guest, and the guest wants to be able to create gratuity for them because of that, that's what it should be. And I don't want to limit them. Nobody's gonna want to work for, $15 to $20 an hour and deal with some of the chaos that we do in the hospitality sector.
Mm-hmm. Right. Would it, so what you already pay a fair bit for labor as it is, don't you? I
Oh,
mean, even with the tip credit.
it's extraordinary here in Chicago. Even with our tip credit, they're attacking, trying to take that away. The hourly rate today for a tip team member is $12.62. If you just look over the last 2 years, that's a 33% increase. You take, general mathematics. If a labor line item is $1 million for an operator and 60% of that is the tip team member, you increase that by 33%. You increase that by $333,000.
But why would McDonald's decide to take this on now? Let's give you a hint. Chili's.
The 3 for Me, only at Chili's, is now available with the all-new Big QP, fries, bottomless chips and salsa, and a bottomless drink, all for just $10.99. So if you're McDone with tiny, overpriced burgers, just come to Chili's. This Chili's 3 for Me is the best $10.99 you can eat.
Sensing consumer frustration over prices last year, Chili's began marketing against McDonald's, which helped that chain's sales take off. That, plus a cheese bill trend on social media, fueled extraordinary growth that continues this year. Chili's same-store sales last quarter rose 24%. By comparison, McDonald's same-store sales rose 2.5%. Some Wall Street analysts have pushed McDonald's hard over the issue, arguing that Chili's is taking share from the fast food giant. McDonald's, in turn, probably believes it has to do something in response. But here's the thing. McDonald's doesn't really compete with Chili's. Some of its customers may be visiting the casual dining chain, but Chili's is not actually big enough to make a big dent. McDonald's is more than 10 times Chili's size. In fact, on a per dollar basis, McDonald's generated more total revenue for itself and franchisees from that 2.5% than Chili's did from its 24%. Letting Chili's get under your skin in a way that Wendy's and Burger King haven't done in decades. In other words, does not make that much sense. Yet the company's decision to jump in the tip credit debate has some real implications. And to talk about it, we brought in Joe Kefauver, managing partner of Align Public Strategies and co-host of the Working Lunch podcast, which also recently tackled this topic. So why do you think McDonald's is taking this stand?
Well, it's a $64 question, and I'm not going to pretend that I am an expert on McDonald's decision-making processes, but for me, as a longtime observer of this, there is, pressure on the model. It's pressure on the brand. And I believe a big chunk of this has to do with demonstrating to the franchisees that they are willing to go to the mat to try to protect the profitability of their investments and the profitability of the model going forward. And I don't want to say franchisee appeasement, but I believe if all were peace and tranquil in franchise world, they probably wouldn't be going down this road, but I could be proven otherwise. I've just watched a year ago or 2 years ago, Jonathan, that exercise in the Wall Street Journal where their former public affairs person, worked with the Wall Street Journal in this kind of, I don't want to say puff piece, but a piece that was clearly designed and planned to demonstrate for their folks in California all that they had done and all the efforts that had been made. And, we're fighting the fight for you. And if I hadn't seen that, I'd be a little less kind of biased on the franchisee appeasement space. But having seen that, it puts all this into, for me, in my humble opinion, the proper context.
Do you think that they are feeling like a punching bag? I mean, there is a lot of, Chili's has generated very strong sales growth. It is sort of a darling of the restaurant industry today. And that comeback, that era that they're in started because Chili's started poking at McDonald's over its prices, and that their prices were more comparable. Did that have anything to do with this, you think?
Maybe I think it's there's dozens of different threads as to what's going on here. I think companies, and I'll take McDonald's out of this. I'll just say companies by and large, and I work with dozens and dozens of Fortune 500 corporations. There's always this inherent assumption that people are as fixated on your brand as you are, right? They're all talking about us. I remember when I left Walmart in 2007, I was amazed that Walmart wasn't a conversation in everyone's living room at all times. Like you're inundated with your own press and your own press clips, and you get outside of the campus and no one's talking about you, man. Right. So there's this inherent bias inside every company, inside most companies, that everyone's just fixated on what you're doing. You're a punching bag, and you're the culprit, and you're the blah, 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 blah. I don't hear many people mouth at McDonald's, and what's going on in their sales and so forth. So I'm less, to me, that's less of an issue that somebody as big and bad as McDonald's would be overreacting to something going on at Chili's. It just doesn't compute to me.
Yeah. Do you think this was, I mean, the thing that I keep hearing though is that this has not really been, the rollout of this has been really problematic. So they got into trouble with the MAGA crowd, for instance, because they were taking on no taxes on tips, which forced them to sort of backtrack-ish again and remind people, no, we're not against no taxes on tips. That particularly challenging. As you pointed out on your podcast, you're going at Donald Trump has actually been a big fan of McDonald's for a long time, and now you're going after one of his signature programs. So it didn't look good from that particular front. It's generated a lot of questions. They're not getting a lot of restaurant operators saying yes, go get them. Nobody is saying that as far as I know. So, what did you get the sense of the rollout here?
Well, there's two separate issues, and they've been concerned about the conflating of elimination of tip credit, tax, and no taxes on tips. And while they are, of course, two separate issues, they're two very arcane issues. And of course, they're going to be conflated. And you can't have a conversation in this day and age about one without the other. Nobody even knows what a tip credit is, right? I mean, nobody, real people outside of the business, right? And so, I think it's going to be nearly impossible for them in any meaningful level in a public discourse to unconflate those issues, because we're going to keep talking about the no tax on tips issue. And at a minimum, if you are successful in separating them, all the focus is going to be on no tax on tips anyway, because both parties have been involved in the conversation. It sunsets in 2028. You could have another administration. Who knows what's going to go on? But my point being, that conversation is always going to come up and overshadow whatever conversation you're having on tip credit elimination. I think one of the other challenges that they're having, and this is, again, Jonathan, you asked my opinion, I'm giving you my opinion, is that I think one of the challenges our friends at One Fair Wage and the tip credit elimination community did not fully anticipate when they were, whiteboarding out their strategy on tip credit elimination. The target, they were ready to take on big bad restaurant companies and big bad employers and blah, 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 blah. I don't think they ever envisioned that they'd actually be on the other side of the table from employees and tip wage employees defending their jobs. Like, I don't think Saru and her team ever conceived of a world where they'd be taking on restaurant employees. They wanted to take on the bad guys in the boardroom. And I don't know how much when McDonald's made the decision to go down this road, they appreciated that factor as well. Like, you're now going into a space that is protected by employees that like the tip wage world as it currently is, that don't want changes to the tip credit world as it currently is, right? I suspect you've got, 1,000 times more tipped workers protective of their jobs and industry model than you do quick service frontline workers, right? I mean, right? I mean, it just, the t-shirts on the tip wage side are protect my jobs. And the t-shirts on the other side these jobs are awful. Right. So I don't know that McDonald's has kind of watched that history unfold on this issue and taken that into account. This is a really sticky area they've now gone into, and it's going to take an ungodly amount of time, money, and persistence to make any headway on it. I think it's a super long shot. And every minute they're focused on this conversation and they're not focused on their core business, which is probably going to come back and bite them at some point.
Right. So you don't think that they can have an actual impact? Not really. Certainly not immediately on this particular debate.
Yeah, I think it's a very long shot that they meaningfully impact this conversation in the near or long-term future. That they've got to get past. I mean, I was a server. I was a room service waiter. I've been a server. That model got me through college. I mean, and there are thousands, tens of thousands of stories like that, right? So they're taking on a class of worker that's fiercely protective of this system. And just ask Saru. She's big blue trifecta states in Massachusetts and Maryland. She's having no traction because she's on the other side of works, right? And I don't know if that was all taken into account in the decision-making process.
Right. So this has to be just basically a show that, look at, we are doing something about this topic. We are doing something about this issue. So this is almost like them peacocking around in some capacity.
Yeah, and I'm kind of biased toward that. Again, I could pretend like I was inside those rooms. I'm not. But that's my bias. But I still think maybe if that's what you're doing, then it seems like you would double down on instead of walking away from your industry devices and policy making organizations, you would double down and triple your investment in the conversation instead of just taking your marbles and going home. I mean, it's the timing of it is super weird to me. You've got this quote unquote friendly administration that is, having INS rating your workforce. You've got the Health and Human Services, you need your ingredients and get ready to, ultra processed food regulations. You've got, your food and construction stuff getting 50% tariffs. And you're in this friendly administration that's attacking you on all fronts. And this is the time you're like, hey, I got a great idea. Let's go it alone. Just the whole thing is so bizarre to me, just on all fronts.
So what was your reaction when you first heard about all this?
My first reaction was disappointment, because I think you get more done at the table than walking away from the table. My second reaction was I was angry, because I think, I'm a great believer that, you can look in the mirror in two ways. It's either an accountability exercise or a vanity exercise, right? And before you start pointing fingers at who didn't do this and who didn't do that, have you done everything you're supposed to do in your own right and made the smart investments and the smart decisions, and you've left no stone unturned in your own before you start wrapping it around the NRA or the IFA or whoever you're disgruntled with at the time. And so I was a little angry about that. Again, I think you know, what's the old axiom? You get more bees with honey, or whatever whatever thing. I think you get more done at the table, and instead of withdrawing their investment, they have the resources to significantly increase their investment and kind of go it alone, or kind of create new working groups or new vehicles for public policy advancement or reputational protection is probably the price tag on moving that is so much more than I think they're ever going to even come close to spending. So I don't understand it on every front. Now, I have a lot of respect, as I said on my podcast, inside the four walls, they are always been just a clinic. They've created a sector of the economy. They created the franchise model. Outside the four walls, that company has always been a head scratcher to me for 30 years. Never quite gotten my finger on what it is they're trying to do and so forth. I said that on my podcast.
Now, through all this, we did not mention one other thing, MAGA. Because all this came in response to a question on no taxes on tips, McDonald's has come under fire from conservatives for its alleged opposition to one of President Trump's main initiatives, even though Chris Kempczinski said that the company was in favor of that policy. That ultimately could come back to haunt the company, given that group's reach on social media. And that could create problems for McDonald's, just as it brought back extra value meals complete with lower prices. The controversy threatened to distract executives and potentially some customers as a result. As for McDonald's franchisees, one operator told me that they prefer the company not get political. And indeed, one reason many corporations are members of associations is so they don't appear political. And that should do it for this episode of A Deeper Dive, but a special thanks to everybody who participated, including several people who helped me understand this topic. And a special thanks to my podcast editor, Spoons, along with my art director, Nico Hines. You can find this and other episodes of A Deeper Dive on our website at www.restaurantbusinessonline.com/article/deeper-dive. But please subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I'm Jonathan Mays, host, podcast producer, and the editor-in-chief of Restaurant Business. Thank you for listening.